Hi, welcome to Trusting God. I'm Charlie Holt, and today we're going to be talking about the promise of great blessing. Abraham was one of the great fathers of trust and faith. He's described throughout the Bible as a hero of somebody who trusts God. But one of the things that's interesting about Abraham is he actually, as you look at his story, is somebody who doubted God and doubted the promises that God made to him. I want to pick up in Genesis chapter 11 with the story of the Tower of Babel. As humanity was spreading out across the earth, there was an impulse in human beings to actually not spread out, but to come together and to build a city. And so the story is told of the Tower of Babel that humanity comes together and says, we don't want to be scattered across the face of the earth. Come, let us come together and make bricks and build a tower so that we might make a great name for ourselves. As the story goes, God sort of looks down from heaven and says, look at what these people are doing. And he confuses their language and scatters them across the face of the earth. One of the key phrases in that story is that they wanted to make a name for themselves. Right after that story, you find incredible promises being given to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. The Lord says to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. And I will make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." These are sometimes called the 7 I will promises to Abraham. I will give you land. I will make your name great. I will make you a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. And through you, all the nations of the world will be blessed. It's incredibly great promises. Abraham at first embraced those promises, but one of the things about God is sometimes he's a little slow in fulfilling his promises. And in order for Abraham to become a great nation and have a multitude of descendants, he would need to have a son. Well, he and his wife Sarah were getting up in years, and there was no child. And Abraham struggled with doubt, so much so that he actually had what you might call an affair, but it was with the agreement of Sarah. But he had a relationship with his servant woman and had a son with her. Not the plan of God, not the will of God, and yet it was an expression of Abraham's doubt and mistrust of the promises that God had made with him. We as human beings have trust issues. You see that in all kinds of things in our daily life, from the fact that the pins are on chains in the banks to the locked doors every night. I now have an app on my phone that I can track where all the members of my family are at every given moment. We have trust issues as human beings, and that's not a good thing. Part of our trust issues are that we actually mistrust and don't trust the good things in our life. We don't trust God. We don't trust His promises. We don't trust our spouses or our children. We don't trust our fine institutions that we have. But we also put our faith in the wrong things, and we maybe have an overtrust in ourselves or in our own abilities. We might trust people that we shouldn't trust, who let us down. And it's actually that problem, the fact that we sometimes put our trust in things, people, institutions, and those things, people, and institutions break their promises, break their trust, and that's actually what causes us to have trust issues. We fear that those promises that are being made aren't going to be fulfilled. Abraham got to a critical moment of wrestling with his doubts and mistrust of God. And it's described in Genesis 15, verses 1 and 2, when he says, After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a great vision. And he said to Abraham, "Fear not." Fear is actually at the heart of our doubts. "I am your shield, and your reward shall be very great." He took Abraham outside and he showed him the incredible stars of heaven. And he said, "Abram, take a look at all those stars." He says, "That's how numerous your descendants are going to be." Abraham wrestled with doubt and he says, "Oh Lord, my God, what will you give me, for I continue childless? And the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus." He doubted the promises of God. There God was, through his word, showing Abraham, "I have this incredible abundance and promise for you." And yet Abraham questioned the promise of God. "I need some sign. I need something for you to show me and signify to me that your promise is true." The Lord knows that we have trust issues. The Lord knows that we need reminders and signifiers of his promise. He knows that he's going to be slow, and so we need something to hold on to get us through the moment of the fulfillment of the promise. Covenantal signs. The rainbow in the clouds is one that we talked about last week. But for Abraham, the sign that he would give him is kind of unusual. Abraham was told by God in that moment, "I want you to go out and take some animals, and I want you to line them up and cut them all in half and set the halves of the animals in a big line." And this was actually something Abraham would have known about. There was something called cutting a covenant. We actually use the term to this day, but the idea is that those animals would be a sign of what would happen to you if you broke your promise. And oftentimes, when two individuals were making a covenantal deal together, they would do the animal ritual, cut the animals in half, and together they would walk through the pieces of the animals, in a sense promising that my word is so true that I'm willing to be cursed and cut in half if I don't keep my word and my promise. Well, Abraham set it all up as his covenant cutting ceremony with the Lord, and then he got drowsy and fell asleep. And he aroused from his dream, and what he saw was actually quite amazing. It was only the Lord that went through the halves of the animal. Normally, Abraham would have gone through it with him, but instead what he witnessed was that God alone took the curse on himself. It's kind of like the sign of the rainbow, where God puts his bow in the clouds as a sign to him that he has to keep his promises. Well, God did the same thing for Abraham. He said, if I don't keep my promise to you, then may what has happened to these animals in the cutting happen to me. God was uttering, in a sense, a curse against himself if he broke his word. See, that's the kind of God that is making promises to you and me. He gives us reassuring signs of his covenant love and faithfulness. The promises that he has given are trustworthy and true. And yet, in our doubts, in our fears, in our brokenness, because we've been hurt so many times by so many people and institutions and all kinds of things, our trust issues actually prevent us from trusting in God. But God has not left us without reassuring signs and symbols. The great sign of God taking upon the curse upon himself, as we've said in the other two lessons, is that all of these signs point to what Jesus did on the cross. That is the great sign of God's covenantal promise and his redemption. But there's something that we have to do in order to, in a sense, close the deal with God's promises. And this is where Abraham really shows us the way. We need to trust that the promise is true. After Abraham was given the promise, your descendants will be as numerous as the stars, he was shown the incredible covenantal sign and the smoking fire pot passing through the animal halves. The Lord called Abraham to put faith in that covenantal promise. The scriptures said Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. The New Testament would pick up on that phrase, and this is why we consider Abraham the father of the faith, is that Abraham shows the way. We need to believe God in order that we might have the promises of God appropriated and applied to our lives. It's in the believing and the trusting in the promises of God's redeeming grace that we receive that same verdict that was given to Abraham, that we are righteous. God is going to take away the curse and the sin and deal with that. We'll get to that. But for now, trust that He will. Trust that God has got it and that He's going to deal with the challenge of humanity and our needs. Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteous. You know, sometimes believing in God's promise can seem far-fetched or too good to be true. Abraham, as an old man with his wife Sarah, they were getting up into their 90s, and they still had not had a child. But the Lord would provide for Abraham and his wife. They would bear a son named Isaac, and that child would be the one who would, through his descendants, ultimately give us the 12 tribes of Israel, and from there, all the way through to the Messiah, the Savior of the world. God fulfilled every one of the 7 promises that He made to Abraham. He gave him an incredible promised land. He made his name great. He multiplied him and made him a great nation. He blessed those who blessed him, and He cursed those who cursed him. And also that final 7th promise that He made to Abraham, that through him all the nations of the world would be blessed, is fulfilled even for us. The writers of the New Testament would commend the faith of Abraham to us. He was the kind of person that, in the way that Paul puts it, he hoped against hope, that he believed God even when it seemed unlikely, even when his trust issues were getting in the way. We may have trust issues too. We may have doubts and fears when it comes to trusting God. And yet we need to do it because it's in trusting God that we receive the gifts of His promise and the righteousness that He would give to us. Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Do you believe in the redeeming promises of God? Do you trust Him in order that you too might have the faith of Abraham and receive the crediting of the righteousness of God?